That was pretty extreme. Everybody, tell your kids out there that energy can be extreme. So thank you, Larry. Well, up next we have Don Clevenger. He's the Senior Vice President for Strategic Planning at Oncor. And he's the mind behind an ambitious, intriguing, and some generators might say a little bit controversial. We'll talk to him about that. Idea to integrate a whole lot of energy storage onto the Texas grid. And I'll be asking him a few questions about that in a little bit, and he'll probably talk about it here. He's a graduate of Abilene Christian. Go Wildcats. He has a law degree from SMU, litigious Mustangs. He spent about a decade as a partner at Hunton & Williams before joining TXU, and there he worked on a number of projects, including the company's venture into foreign markets. Beginning in 2007, he began focusing on legal, regulatory, and policy issues at Oncor. And in 2013, he became head of the new strategic planning group responsible for Oncor's IT, risk management, asset investment, and strategy and technology functions. It's a mouthful. Please welcome Don Clevenger.
Good evening. Yeah, as you heard, I'm a recovering lawyer. So I've, sorry? Nope, no presentation. I'm good. And have been around the utility industry for about 2 decades, outside counsel for TXU for a while, and then in-house, and then moved around until I found a job they didn't run me off from. So, but wanted to talk to you about, I agree with just about everything Larry said, and it's always the risk of going second. I'll try not to repeat because he and I have talked about this, energy storage, and are both excited about where it's going to go. For the last several decades, the energy industry has spent a lot of its resources, just about all of its resources, in improving the generation assets in this country. And have done a remarkable job of improving their efficiency. If you've seen the heat rate curves, how much they've improved over that time period. We've been able to get rid of just a lot of the pollutants in there, other than carbon, which we're working on. But all of the pollutants, a lot of the other pollutants have gotten to a very high degree of keeping them out. Until the last decade, what we've been basically ignoring was the T&D part of the grid, and that's where Oncor is. For those of you not familiar with the deregulated market in Texas, over a decade ago when we deregulated, we set up the generators, the retail providers who directed the customers, and in the middle, the continued to be regulated wires and poles company. And that's Oncor, AEP in Texas, CenterPoint are the primary investor-owned utilities in Texas that just own the wires and poles. And though not really thought about at the time, in hindsight, I look back on that, and we've talked about this a lot in Oncor and with other companies, that's really become one of the unforeseen, unintended benefits of deregulation, is that you now have these management teams who aren't worried about fuel reconciliation and pipe leaks. They're focused on that middle part, that delivery system that has been called the great engineering achievement of the 20th century. And now we're able to, with the advancements in technology, the advancements in computing power, the advancements in telecom bandwidth, now able to see the technologies that can be put on the grid to increase its efficiency and really modernize it. There's a lot of talk of where the grid's going. We know it's changing, as Larry talked about. It's changing dramatically, and there's predictions of everyone's going to be off the grid in a decade or less, to there's not going to be much change at all. It's going to be changing, and the real trick is it's unpredictable. Whether you're in a state like Texas where you continue to grow, you continue to need not only additional energy every year, but you're going to need a good diversity of fuels powering that generation, to other states that are seeing flat, maybe even negative declines, to states looking at different ways to do the regulatory models, questions around how much PV we're going to see on the system, how much electric vehicles we're going to see on the system, what the consumer is going to need out of its future electric grid is going to be unpredictable. And that's why one of our main focuses in Oncor is we've got to use technology to make the grid adaptable and flexible. Now that's like telling an elephant to learn to tap dance. Our industry has not been good at change, and for very good reason. One is it's a massive system. Our system alone goes for thousands of miles. We have 110,000 miles of distribution line, another 15,000 of transmission line, stretching from Tyler to Midland, Odessa, from the Red River to Round Rock. The system is incredibly dynamic. I frankly, even though I'm not an electrical engineer, but as much as I've learned about the industry over the last 20 years, I still don't understand how they kept the flows aligned before the computers. The dynamics of the system are incredible, and keeping that in perfect sequence is an amazing art. I mean, and thirdly, that the system is so essential to everyday life. It keeps people alive literally, and it runs every business in the country. Comparing the electric industry to the telephone deregulation, or to airline deregulation, or to thankfully not savings and loan deregulation, is a complete misnomer. It's a completely different system with a completely different functionality, and that's why our strategic vision at Oncor is to acknowledge that we've got to demonstrate the value of the grid, and we've got to do it using technology so that the grid will be as flexible as it can be for whatever consumers decide to do, whether it's vehicles, electric vehicles, whether it's distributed generation. So I'm going to talk about a few of those different technologies that we're looking at. Some of them Larry touched on as well. I guess the first one we'll start with, because it's the one that has been in the news lately, is energy storage. So the notion for most of the history of the electric industry is we can't store power, and it's always been called the Holy Grail if we could figure out how to do it economically. And so let's just talk about why for a second. And I'm sure a lot of you know this, but in Texas we have 77,000 megawatts of generation of some form of capacity on the system. ERCOT predicts this summer, at our hottest, at our most demand, we will have 15% of that generation sitting completely idle. On our average day in ERCOT, we will have half of our generation sitting idle. And that doesn't differ from many places in the country. Now think about if you're Nike or General Motors or any other large manufacturer, and you're told good news, half the days your manufacturing will be sitting idle. That's a disaster. You close plants, you lay off people. In the electric industry, we've learned to live with that degree of inefficiency because, like I mentioned before, we have to keep things in balance. We have to prepare for that hottest summer day or that coldest winter day when a plant trips offline, has to go down for maintenance. We have to have that inefficiency built in. We've learned to deal with it, but it is not ideal, and we're sometimes caught in the fact of that has been how we've had to do it for so many decades that we don't think of ways to change. I'll give you another example. Think of the inefficiencies of the system we've just become to live with. Think about how the electric system was developed in this country. In a small town or in Dallas, the doctor would get a hold of a generator and set it up and get generation for his house. Well, his buddy, the judge across the street, would then want to have a line strung over so he could have it, and then it kept stringing and stringing until somebody finally bought the whole system, replaced it with a big efficient generator at the time, and where was it? In the center of town. If you've been to Dallas, the American Airlines Center, where the Mavericks and the Stars play, is right there with just a few blocks from downtown Dallas, and until that center was built, it still had one of the first generators that was built in Dallas. Well, all those generators are gone from the urban centers. We got them out to help clear up the haze, to get rid of the pollutants. There's only one generator left in Dallas County, and it's a peaker that barely runs. When you pull generators that far from where the load is, you have problems keeping it stable. So what have we had to do? We've had to put in a $50 million and an $80 million static bar compensator that can help with the voltage stay within the standards so that the grid doesn't fail. That's all that device does. For $80 million and $50 million, those two devices, all they do is fire off a few times a year to keep it stable. So what's my point? Batteries could solve all of that. They can optimize the generation fleet. They make us cut down that tremendous inefficient fleet we've just had to live with, and they do a whole lot of other things like reliability, like voltage support. They cure a lot of the inefficiencies if we can figure out how to do it economically. And the notion all along, at least for a while, has been put massive batteries out by your generators, out by your wind farms, out by your solar farms to optimize that unit. Well, we've started thinking about it differently and not novelly, because several of our vendors were thinking about it as well. And I especially point to one of our longtime 80-year vendors out of Chicago, S&C, and their chairman and CEO until recently, when he retired, John Esty, and the notion of distributed storage. So instead of putting massive batteries at a generator, put one on every neighborhood. Put one behind every Walmart, every big box store. If you could really get good, put one at every corner of every street. You virtually if you could do that, get that close to the houses and the businesses, you basically wipe out blue sky day outages. Our average outage, and I know Austin and ours are very similar, our average customer has about an outage or an outage and a half a year on average. Said it 3 times. That outage on average lasts about an hour, and they have one or two a year at most. If you could have a battery with a 1 hour capacity, you wipe out blue sky outages. All you're left with is the big ice storms, the big wind storms that come through. But that won't pay for those batteries. And so back 3 or 4 years ago, when we started looking at the notion of distributed storage, and we realized you're never going to put one on every house, that's not anywhere near economic. Come out to the edge of the subdivision, still not economic. Come out to the big box store, well, you're getting closer, but 3 or 4 years ago, you're still ways off. About a year ago, we kept up with this notion, though, and about a year ago, we started talking to manufacturers more detail and seeing studies and analysts coming out talking about how battery prices had dropped. Lithium-ion had dropped 60% over the last 5 years, was expected to drop down to about $100 a kWh potentially by the end of the decade. Well, that starts to get really close. And so we went out and asked Brattle, the Brattle Group, we said, okay, how much storage could you put in ERCOT and be economic? The notion here you got to start with is, after you count up all the benefits, the customer bill's got to stay flat at worst, or it's just not going to work, especially in a deregulated market. And so, and we said, and the second proposition is, we don't want to mess with our deregulated market. Businesses love it. We don't want to mess with that. It's some of the lowest rates in the country. And so Brattle did the study, and what they came back and what they found was that, and it's online, you can find it, Brattle's site or the foundationgrid.com and some other places, is that 5,000 megawatts or 15,000 megawatt hours of storage would be economic for the grid in a distributed manner if you can get all the benefits captured in one place. And that's the real difficulty here in the deregulated market. And so we can probably talk more about that in the question and answer session. But that's what we'd like to see, we'd like to do if it's possible. One key point that Brattle pointed out was that as long as you're not deploying more batteries than your growth, you're not hurting the generation prices in the state either, and that's critical. You can't depress wholesale generation prices and drive generators from the market. We've got to keep having generation built in this state. We're a fast-growing state. And so that's a key part of this, is you only do enough storage, you don't do enough to suppress power prices. But there's other technologies as well. Advanced meters we deployed in this state, started deploying in this state in about 2005. Actually, I think Austin was doing just maybe a year or two before that. When I first moved into Oncor, we, like a lot of the country still is, if we had a major storm and that blew the trees, blew the lines down, and we would restore the lines, we didn't know for sure that your power was out unless we drove around and looked for porch lights. That's archaic. It's still how most of the country works if you don't have the advanced meters. So in 2005, we started deploying, 2008, we started deploying advanced meters and deployed them throughout the service center. Austin has them deployed, CenterPoint, AEP, all of the investor-owned utilities have them deployed now in Texas. We save over 17,000 truck miles a year because of the meters. We're not going out to do disconnects. We're not going out to do move-in, move-outs. We know 25% of the time we'll know before the customer does, either because they're not home or they're asleep, that their power is out, and we have it restored before they even have enough time to call in or realize that it's out. we probably did ourselves a disservice back in the middle of the decade when a lot of the industry was prices were high, with natural gas being so high before fracking and the recession, and we pitched advanced meters on the notion of you can take control of your energy bill. And we got and what we didn't do a good enough job was talking about the operational efficiencies that it creates. Frankly, we didn't know what all they were going to create until we got them deployed. At the price of power in Texas now, most consumers don't care about using that smart meter to help them save money. It's cheaper than their gas bill, so their gasoline bill. So, but the efficiencies we get out of them are tremendous, and they're just the beginning. They're just kind of the base of the new grid. Because the next part we have to start, we are deploying, but it seems to be going sluggishly slow for the strategy guy who'd love to see it all come to fruition today, is the smart grid, the ability for devices to heal, for grids to heal themselves in a fashion, well, that's somewhat overstating it, but at least being able to isolate outages, to minimize the amount of people that are out while our crews can get there and fix the problem. And then the third part of that is distributed generation. We've actually done a smaller microgrid than Larry was talking about. We built a new environmental lab in 20 miles south of downtown Dallas in Lancaster, and just opened it this month. And around it, we put a microgrid. And so when a lot of people talk about microgrids in different places, and what we really talk about with a microgrid is the ability to separate yourself from the grid when there's a problem on it and sustain yourself with your own generation indefinitely. Merely having a backup diesel generator is not a microgrid. So the microgrid that we built is also to be able to test gear, but right now what we put on it was the smart grid equipment, so it can island itself from the grid if needed. And then it has a 100 kilowatt solar array. It has a 65 kilowatt micro turbine, and that to me was a real fun piece of gear. A football-sized turbine that can generate 65 kW using propane gas, they will also burn on natural gas. Then we also have in this case, a Tesla battery, a 200 kW, 400 kWh Tesla battery. That's main purpose is to provide power to the facility until the microturbine can get up and running for it and the solar panels to provide the power. And we also have 6 smaller 25 kW batteries spread throughout the southern part of Dallas, and to see what they'll do. You get a lot of talk from vendors on what these things will do. We wanted to see them for ourselves. We had one on the end of a feeder, a particularly long feeder in South Dallas on two houses connected to it. And in October 2nd, we had one of the worst windstorms we've had, 100-mile-an-hour winds, ancient trees being thrown out on the lines, and one was thrown across the feeder where these two houses had the battery, and the two houses never knew the power went out because the battery looks at the voltage and comes up as needed, and they stayed on for 5 hours while their neighbors were out. So we're getting to see this in real time. We're getting to test what these things can do. Tell you what, putting the microgrid together was a really interesting process because these things just don't come together and you just don't install them and let it go. The control systems are incredibly complex. Having the battery sense the voltage and come up, but then allow the microturbine to come up while the battery goes down is a very, very complex system that we're still fine-tuning, actually. And we've learned a lot about how to put these things into real life. So like I started with, our main focus is that the grid be flexible. We don't know and we can't predict what consumers are going to need from it. They may need less energy. They may be having more if there's a big push for electric vehicles. Power quality, like Larry talked about, is huge for the C&I customers, and we've got to be flexible enough to be able to provide that as well. Some cities are going to start figuring out that a huge economic driver can be power quality and reliability. The grid's got to be able to provide that as well. So look forward to your questions. Just want to go up here.